Hey everyone, it's Lori, and I am here today with my April reading wrap up. I read 18 books in the month of April, and that's unusually high for me. There's a couple of things that contributed to that. I finished quite a few books that I've been reading over a long period of time, and there was a lot of stuff that I really should have been doing and I didn't want to do, so I just read it instead. So that pretty much sums up how I got through 18 books. I did talk about one of the 18 in last month's reading wrap up, so I'm going to talk about 17 of the books today. I decided today to kind of break them up by types of books. I'll have timestamps below, so if you're interested in a particular category of books, you can jump directly to that. So I'm going to start off with middle grade. I ended up reading 4 middle grade books in the month of April. We'll start with my lowest rated middle grade book, which I do not have with me at the moment. It was a library book that I've already returned, and that is Nine from the Nine Worlds by Rick Riordan. It's basically a collection of 9 short stories from the Magnus Chase series, which is the Norse mythology. It was cute. I read it really quickly, probably in about an evening. I got a little sick of the little shtick that was running from story to story was Thor running in leather shorts, so that got old pretty quickly. But it was enjoyable, but nothing really to write home about. Our family read aloud that we finished this month. It's called Revolution is Not a Dinner Party by Ying Chang Compestine or Stein. I'm not sure. This book is about a young girl who is growing up in China at the time of the Maoist Revolution. So when Chairman Mao comes into power, her family suffers quite a bit. Her parents are both doctors. And so it just kind of goes through how she is treated by other people, how she's treated in school, the things that happen to her parents because they are considered bourgeoisie sympathizers. So this is a historical fiction novel. It is based in part on the author's own growing up in China during this period of time, and also on some experiences that some of her friends had during that point in time. It is very anti-communism, and it's kind of understandable why, going from her experiences. So we thought this one was pretty valuable to show our children a different take on what things look like in the world. So this one was pretty good. I gave it 4 stars. The other 2 middle grade novels that I read this month were both books written in verse. So the first one is Lifeboat 12 by Susan Hood. And the girls and I did a discussion video on this one. I highly recommend you check this one out. It's set during World War II. It's a story of a boy who is sent to Canada on a ship. The ship is torpedoed and sunk. And then he and the rest of his lifeboat that he ends up in, which is Lifeboat 12, end up adrift for like 8 days, and that's about how much water they have before rescue. So this one was very well written and compelling. Has some great information in the back about all the research that the author did, some pictures, just all sorts of details. I highly, highly recommend that you check this one out. Another book in verse that I read this month was Bluebirds by Caroline Starr Rose. She's also the author of the book Maybe, and I read that one several years ago. I think I've read it twice. And I always encourage my girls to read it. Maybe is set in the American West, and Bluebirds is about the lost colony at Roanoke. So, very interesting story. We have 2 female characters here that become friends against their community's wishes, and just what comes from that friendship. So this is another one I would highly recommend. Next up, I read 2 adult fiction books. The first one was a library book that I have already returned. and that was Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I rated that book 3 stars. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't like mind blowing or anything. If you have seen the movie Sliding Doors, you basically will know the plot. Maybe in Another Life follows a main character and pivots around one decision, whether she goes home with her friend from a party or whether she goes out with her ex-boyfriend after the party. And so each chapter is alternating between if she does and if she doesn't. I really think it was basically the plot of Sliding Doors. So if you've seen that, you really don't need to read this book. And then my other adult fiction was much, much better. And that was So Brave, Young, and Handsome by Leif Enger. So this is the last Leif Enger book that I haven't read. So I'm really hoping he's working on another one, even though, his last book just came out and there's been like 10-year gaps between his books. But this book follows an author. He's a failing author. He's written one book and he's been trying to write a second book for forever, and it's not going well. And he meets this interesting character who is a former robber, former bad guy who has robbed trains and so forth. And they go on kind of a road trip together. So this is set in 1915. So they travel from Minnesota all the way. They're heading for Mexico to begin with, and they actually end up in California at one point. So they have kind of a long trip. The author learns a lot about himself and a lot about this character that he's been traveling with. There's a ex-Pinkerton detective that comes into the story for a long period of time. So this one is a very fun book to read. I love Leif Enger's writing style. I think Virgil Wander was my favorite of his. I'm not sure if I would put Peace Like a River or So Brave, Young, and Handsome in second place. They're both very good. I also read one fantasy book this month, and that is The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. This is the second book of the Wheel of Time series. I read The Eye of the World in March, and I am starting The Dragon Reborn, the third book, I've started it already, but I'll be reading it mostly in May. In The Eye of the World, I really enjoyed Rand and Perrin. I didn't really like Matt, and I didn't know how to feel about the female characters. In this one, I really began to appreciate Egwene in Nynaeve, and I just thought that the plot line that involves Egwene was fabulous towards the end of this book. I was not expecting that at all, and I really found it just mind-blowing, just the whole concept. So I am looking forward to seeing what happens with Egwene and Nynaeve in the next book, which they haven't shown up yet, but I'm only like a couple chapters in. So this one I gave 5 stars. I also finished a couple of classic books this month. The first one I want to talk about is The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. This is one I've been reading for a long time. I've been reading this with a book buddy, and we were supposed to start it in December, and I don't think I actually got started until the very end of December, if not the beginning of January. And I just finished this a day or so ago, and I'm still wrapping my head around it, so I haven't even really talked with my book buddy about the ending of it. This is the story of a family. There's the dad. He has 3 sons and possibly 1 illegitimate son, and the father is murdered, and one of the sons is accused of it. And so that's the basic plot line, but there's like 36 other plot lines going on in here. There are 12 books in here. So, even taking it one book at a time took a long time. This is the first book I tried to read when I got my Kindle, like 12 years ago or whenever I first got my Kindle. Because, obviously it's public domain. I couldn't make it through because there just was no end in sight. So I did get a paper copy this time so that I could see that indeed the book does end eventually. I gave this one 4 stars. It's very interesting. I enjoyed the writing, but if somebody asked me to pick it up and read it with them tomorrow, that would be a no. I'm going to need a few years before I revisit this one. And then the other classic that I finished this month is The Return of the King. So I finished The Lord of the Rings. Both of these books, besides this one being with a book buddy, I am also using for my Catholic 2019 challenge. This was my book by an Orthodox, and this was my long Catholic book because I read the other 2 volumes up there before this one. So I always enjoy The Return of the King. And this one is a 5-star book for me. If somebody asked me to start reading the series with them again tomorrow, I probably would. So I'm always up for more Tolkien. I did read quite a bit of nonfiction this month. So I'm going to start with the first one I read was actually called Alaska by Cruise Ship by Anne Vipond. This is one I found at the library. We are going to be taking an Alaska cruise. I can't remember if I talked about this in the last reading wrap-up, but according to Goodreads, I finished it in April. This was pretty good. I gave it 3 stars. I skipped over the parts that didn't apply to us, so ports we weren't visiting I didn't read about, and cruise tours I didn't read about because we're not doing a cruise and a tour. We're simply doing a 7-day there and back cruise of the lower part of Alaska. So I just found it did have some suggestions for things to do in different ports, but I was hoping for more. It was a little bit outdated too. Sometimes that's the case with library books, but I don't think I'd go run out and buy a newer edition. The next nonfiction book that I read was The Great American Read by Jessica Allen. This I did an entire review on, so I will link that below and see if I can figure out how to put a card up above. This is a book that explores the 100 best loved novels in America. They're not American novels necessarily. And this is pretty good. This is not a book about books that I think I would want to own, that I would go back to a lot, but I enjoyed reading through it because it gave a brief description of each of the 100 books as well as some author biographical information. I did add quite a few books to my want to read shelf on Goodreads from it, so it was worth my time. And another library book that I had that I have already returned was called Good Morning, Good Night, Little Pep Talks for Me and You, and that was by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I checked that one out because my kids are obsessed with Hamilton, so I thought it'd be fun. And then one morning I had to drive one of the girls to town relatively early. We had to leave the house at like 6:30, and I woke up at 4 a.m. and I thought, if I go back to bed now, getting out the door at 6:30 is really going to suck. So I decided to just get up, and I read it between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. I loved it. The artwork was amazing, and it was tweets, so it took almost no time. But that one I would definitely recommend reading because it was just very uplifting and cheerful, and it was just the kind of thing that I needed on a morning like that. Nonfiction book that I read this month. Technically, that's not true. The last regular nonfiction book I read this month, we're going to get to my Catholic nonfiction in a minute here, is A Little Bit Wicked, Life, Love, and Faith in Stages by Kristen Chenoweth. And I rated this 3 stars. It was fun to read about Kristen. I did not know all of the details of like her education, that she has like a master's degree and she was going to be an opera singer. I do know she has an amazing voice, um, and I do appreciate her talent. Um, I just didn't connect with it the way I do with some memoirs. It was fine. Um, we're gonna go see Wicked in a few weeks when my sister in law comes to town. So when I saw this at the library, I just thought, might as well read it. So it was cute, 3 stars. And the last category that I had this month was Catholic books. So I have 4 more books besides The Brothers Karamazov and Return of the King, that were all part of my Catholic 2019 challenge. The first of those is Divine Mercy in My Soul, The Diary of St. Maria Faustina Kowalska. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoy diaries because it gives you a different sense than like something that was written for an audience would. Um, but there were also some things that made me a little uncomfortable in here. There's one occasion where she talks about a ill person. I think she was ill herself, or maybe she was helping out. She spent a lot of time ill in different facilities for care. But there was a Jewish woman, and she was being taken care of by some nuns, and the family was generally with her. And the nuns really wanted to baptize this poor Jewish lady because she was going to die soon, but they couldn't because her Jewish family was there. And so miraculously, the family left and they baptized the Jewish woman, and that made me super duper uncomfortable. I know it was a different time period, so maybe I should just get over it, but that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I just found it very interesting, though. St. Faustina had visions of an image of Jesus, and Jesus told her to have somebody make this image so that it could be venerated. So, Divine Mercy Sunday was instituted, I believe, in the year 2000 by Pope John Paul II. And it is the Sunday after Easter, so it just passed, and I finished this right about Easter, and then my family did the Divine Mercy Novena, where you pray the Chaplet of Divine Mercy for 9 days, and we finished up on Divine Mercy Sunday, so it was kind of a neat time of year to finish this. This is a book I had been working on for a very long time. Another book that I gave 4 stars was my book by a pope for the Catholic 2019 challenge, and that's The Apostles by Pope Benedict XVI. I chose this one because it was little, and it was actually surprisingly readable. I think of Pope Benedict XVI as being like an extreme academic, so I was surprised at how accessible I found this to be. It goes through the 12 apostles, and then it also covers St. Paul, and some of the other early church people. And it just goes chapter by chapter. So I would read 1 to 3 chapters a day. If it was about St. Paul, it tended to be longer, or St. Peter. But then, some of the other apostles that we don't know that much about, they just have a couple of pages, so I might read 2 or 3 of them at a time. So I did give this one 4 stars. I was pleasantly surprised by this one. Another book I gave 4 stars was A Year with the Church Fathers, Patristic Wisdom for Daily Living by Mike Aquilina. It's actually edited by Mike Aquilina. This was my book by a church father. It's kind of cheating because it's just like little excerpts from a whole bunch of different church fathers. I don't do well with a year with books. I want to be the kind of person that can do this, but I am just not the kind of person who can do this. So I ended up reading several pages per day, and at the end I just wanted to be done, so I just finished it. I think I read like 30 days worth on that last day that I was reading it, but I did enjoy all of the bits of wisdom, and there are a couple of works of early church fathers that I'm now interested in picking up. One in particular is City of God by St. Augustine. That's probably going to be the first one I pick up. I don't exactly know when, because I am trying really hard to read some of the books on my shelves that I haven't read before I buy new books. My favorite Catholic book that I finished this month was Theology and Sanity by Frank Sheed. So, um, I was kind of intimidated by this, and I'm not really sure why. I think it's because I had just finished a Peter Kreeft book, and I find Peter Kreeft difficult. I had forgotten how much I like Frank Sheed. This I used for my Catholic 2019 challenge, but it is also in the Read Your Way to Heaven year 2. And in year 1, we read A Map of Life, I believe, by Frank Sheed. And the group that I was reading with at the time, we're still kind of reading it, but nobody's really at the same spot, so we don't discuss as much as we used to. But when we were reading A Map of Life, I was in the minority for people who liked it. A lot of people found Frank Sheed to be extremely repetitive, and I think maybe I just need extremely repetitive, because I just found this so much more accessible than Practical Theology by Peter Kreeft, which we read before. And I gave this one 5 stars because if somebody asked me tomorrow if I would read it with them, I definitely would. I marked up this book, and I really truly intend to come back and read it again, because I feel like there's a lot more there that hasn't sunk in for me yet. But I highly recommend this one. I like Frank Sheed a lot. I don't know if that makes me strange or not, but anyway, so Theology and Sanity was my favorite Catholic book. My favorite book overall this month would be Lifeboat 12. So that was in the middle grade. I also really enjoyed So Brave, Young, and Handsome and The Great Hunt. But overall, I had a very fun month of reading. So I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about these books. If you've read any of these and would like to chat with me about it, I'd love to talk with you in the comments below. And thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.